here with Mr. Maldonado. He was my teacher at Princeton Academy 4 years ago, approximately. I consider him as one of the most impressive and amazing teachers I have ever encountered in my path. So here we are with a little interview for him. So, can you tell me your full name, mister?
My full name, uh, most people don't know it, but is Gonzalo Javier Maldonado Mora.
Okay. Your age?
Ooh, those trade secrets. I am 31 years old,
31 years old. That's okay.
or 31 years young. Of
Exactly that. Um, your gender? You're obviously a male. Okay.
course.
What's your place of birth?
Place of birth, specifically, I was born in Guayaquil. A lot of people, I think, believe I was born in the States because of my English, but I was actually born in Guayaquil.
Yeah, right. You kind of speak like a native. Um,
We'll talk about that in a bit.
yeah. Your workplace. Where are you currently working?
Currently, I am working only at Princeton Academy, but aside from Princeton, I also have my own, I guess you could say, side hustle. Not sure if I would call it a hustle, but yeah, I guess it's like my own business.
Okay. What is your highest academic level?
Uh, if we're talking about how far I went in studies, I graduated as a uh, English teacher from the languages major at the University Técnica of Manaví, Technical University of Manaví. So I guess I have a college degree.
Okay. What about your job experience? How many years have you been teaching?
Ooh, boy, it depends. If we're talking about uh, like substitution, I've been teaching probably since like 2014. But if we're talking about just like when I actually had a stable job, I'd say 2016 was when I officially started working at Princeton Academy. And then after that, during that same year, entering 2017, I started working at Manaví Tecnológico. So 2016, 2017, I'd say about 6 to 7 years at this point, if we're talking about officially
Yes.
enrolled in a place of work.
Yeah, that's what we're talking about here.
All
Um,
right.
okay, what are the current teaching levels you are like your students?
Since I mainly work since right now, since I actually only work at the academy, it really varies. We don't, not talking about school levels like first, second, third. No, I guess you could say language levels. I teach students from level A2 until B2. So I guess that would be the range that I teach.
So you think that you have the no experience to teach to any of those levels, right?
Not only do I have the experience, but that's what I do currently. I probably could teach higher level students as well, just we don't have any higher levels at the academy at the moment.
Okay. Now let's go with the next questions. Where were you born?
Um, so I was born in the city of Guayaquil.
Mhm.
Not sure too much about the other specifics, but like specific hospital, specific hour, but
It's
I
okay.
was born in Guayaquil.
Okay. How do you consider that was your childhood? How do you consider your
Um, at least the parts that I can remember, my childhood was amazing. It was great. I lived in obviously the first few years of my life. I lived in Guayaquil, here in Ecuador. Then when I was around 3, 4 almost, I went to the United States, and I pretty much lived out the rest of my childhood over there. If I had to go into detail, I guess I had a lot of fun. I had a lot of different experiences than what I realized that I think a lot of people have here. So, uh, as a summary, that was my childhood.
Okay. Then you said that you live a while in the States, so you learn English there, right?
Yes, I did learn English there, but I did want to make a little bit of a, I guess you could say, an asterisk, because I like to believe that, at least I've studied this because I study a lot of these things for when I teach. But there's a big difference between learning a language and acquiring a language. And I feel that what I got while I was in the States was more acquisition because of the need to interact with others, the need to understand people. So I was just in an environment where yes, I did have classes that taught me English, but because of the necessity that I had to know English, I only acquired it. It was only when I started trying to become a teacher here in Ecuador that I actually, I guess you could say, learned English, like was able to understand not just this sentence is this sentence because yes, but I was able to understand this is the reason behind this sentence.
Yeah, so you went from this like the ESL, the English as a second language, from to the English as a foreign language, where you first had the context and all the stuff in the at the United States, and after that you came like to learn the official like grammar structures and the stuff, right?
Yes,
Okay.
pretty much.
What motivated you to become an English teacher?
At one point in my life, I would have never considered it, to be honest. Like as a student in the States, like I never thought of myself like being a teacher. But then there was a part of me when I got over here, an obvious part where, oh, I know English, I can teach this. It would be a good thing to do. But then there was another part of me that felt like, because there's a part of me that likes to motivate others, like be inspirational. So I kind of thought one good way, at least one starting way that I can do this, is by being a teacher. If I can teach people a language, then maybe I can motivate them to do better things for themselves, which I always, well, as teachers here, we always say English is important no matter where you go. So you motivate people to do something that maybe they don't see as useful, and it could be useful for them later on.
And I think you succeed in that because I consider you as a role model.
Flattery will get you everywhere.
Okay. Then, what kind of teaching training you would like to receive? Like to improve your teaching skills?
Teaching training, what I like to receive. Honestly, right now, what I really, 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 really would want if I wanted to like get to the next level and prove myself, I would want to prepare for the more, I guess you could say, complicated English tests, because there are tests that check your level to see how good you are at the language. And the last time I took two tests that were supposedly kind of difficult, but not like the most difficult, I got perfect scores on those tests. But the thing is, then afterwards, people were telling me, no, there's a harder test. So part of me is like, wants to prove that I can be better by taking those tests. Aside from that, because that's more the language part, for the teacher part, I would want to learn from people who were or are teachers in the country that is supposedly the best country at teaching, which is supposedly Finland. So it would be great if there were like a seminar where there were teachers from Finland who taught us the strategies that they use to teach. Though I kind of feel like the situation with Finland is different from over here,
Yeah,
because their structure to what a school is like is very different from what the structure of what a school is like over here. So maybe they have that as an advantage. But it's still not a bad idea to learn from other professionals.
yeah, get at our point of view. I totally agree. Okay, then the next question says, are your classes teacher-centered or student-centered? And explain.
Okay, so when we talk about how I like, I had to think about this one a little bit, because when it comes to a class, like I'm not sure what you mean by teacher centered or student centered, but if you mean like, do I focus more on the student or what I think they need or what they actually need, it's more of a situation. It varies from class to class. Like obviously, when you go first like head first into a class of people who you don't know, it's like it is kind of teacher centered because you have to assume what they tell you. Like, oh, these students are level A2. So, okay, they're A2. I think this is going to work for them. But once you get to know the students, once you've been in the class, once you've seen some nuances that some students have over others, like how fast some students work, how much some are maybe a little bit further behind, you make it more student centered where you focus on the necessities that they have in order to reach the goal that you want as a teacher, which is for them to learn and reach the next level. At least when it comes to English learning, it's always for me, I want them to be better than they were before they entered my class. But I can't do that if I don't know them. And like I go into a like I said, I go into a class where I don't know anyone. I have to assume that the strategy I have is going to be the best one, even though it might not be. It's just what I think because I haven't met them yet.
Exactly. You have to make a diagnostic test in a way, like observation and listening to what they say. Um, okay. Then, what do you think are the best methods or techniques or strategies you use to teach English?
One that I think, at least I really like applying this in my classes. I've done it a little bit less now because now I'm working with new techniques and it's always evolving. But one thing that I always find very useful is to use competitions because people really like to do their best when there's incentive to do their best. Like, oh, if I win, I prove something. I don't know. For some students, it's like proving something. Maybe it's a prize. Like, oh, you get a like in a school setting, you say, oh, you get a good grade if you do better than everyone else. I mean, you can't give everyone else a bad grade for not doing the best, but it's like there has to be like an incentive because I feel like people are very competitive and that kind of drives them to try their best and to get like a better well, I guess you could say grade if you're in a classroom setting or to do better than they normally would do. I saw this a lot in some of the activities that I used to do where students that I considered were kind of I guess well the direct word is lazy, but I guess you could also say they weren't as dedicated as the rest. They would become a little bit more motivated when there was a competition. Like, oh, I have to be better than everyone. I have to try because yeah, I don't want to be the worst. I want to be the best. So it's like you would see a little bit more of a push from them in that aspect. So I feel like competition is really good. If you do it correctly, you also have to, like I said, the reward can't be something that is gonna like it has to benefit everyone and it can't make anyone feel bad. And if it does make them feel bad, it has to come with a lesson that doesn't just like, oh, you suck or you're bad. No, you learn something from this because that's the way it has to be. If not, you just kind of like leave people behind. So there's a bit of strategy behind that as well.
Okay, I really actually think that it's a good technique, it's a good method, since you're pushing them to put a lot more some effort like before. Okay, now let me ask you, what technological tools do you suggest to your students or teachers for them to learn or teach in English?
Um, this is a tough one depending on where you're at because it really depends on the environment that you find yourself in. I saw this problem a lot before the pandemic where I always wanted to use technology. Like even if it's just the cell phone, I wanted to incorporate the possibility of students using certain apps, certain websites in order to play activities, games, do some assignments in a different way. Because even if it's like, for example, I can give you a worksheet with 10 questions and make you answer those questions on the worksheet. But for some people, just seeing those same 10 questions in an app on a phone or on a website, it motivates them to try it a little bit more just because it's a different kind of experience. But this is where there's a conflict between the levels of I guess you could say, the social class that every person is in. Because before the pandemic, there were a lot of people who didn't have like, or they always said, we don't have technology, we can't do the assignment. Some people are lazy and they'll just say that and it's not the truth. But some people really just didn't have the means to have those things. But after the pandemic, it's become a little bit easier to get people to use technology because everyone needed technology during the pandemic. So if we're talking about now, there's a lot more people you can work with, certain websites. One that I love to use is Kahoot. I haven't used it a lot these past few years because I didn't have a laptop. But it's a really good resource. There's also one that I really like, but you have to prepare things by yourself. It's called ED Puzzle. Great website as well, as long as you prepare it yourself. It takes time. Believe me, it takes time, but it's very useful. So I think they're great, but there are people who are working in places where they just can't apply it because they don't have the technological means to do so, the resources. That, like, I have a friend who works in the countryside, because the government sent her to the countryside. That's how, the government education works. And sometimes they'll send you to places that you just have to find different ways to work things out. And that's where you just have to be creative. And as teachers, that's a good thing about some teachers, is being very creative. Like, if you can't use a website, then maybe you use like what do you call that? Like a big piece of paper, and you like put on certain things, and you have like these little tags that you can give the students. Okay, you have to paste this in the place where it's supposed to go so that the sentence is correct, doing things like that. So you can do similar things, just you have to be very creative about it when you don't have the technological resources. So I prefer technology and I'd recommend it. It's just it's not available to everyone, and not everyone uses it correctly anyways. So
Okay, that was an interesting answer. Now, how do you think your beliefs and values have an impact on the way you teach?
um I think one of the main ways that they have an impact, more than anything, I think my values is the fact that I am very demanding, because I'm very demanding with myself. So if I believe that it's not that, like, just because some people think, oh, you're omnipotent because you came from the States, English, you're the best already. But it's not that. I always go, like, whenever I'm doing things, I'll do them in the language that I'm teaching, like in English. Like, I'll research stuff in English, I'll practice stuff in English. Before I give a class, I'll investigate the topic for like an hour or more, like trying to find the nuances. And it's not just like I look for one source, I look for various sources. So it's, for me, being very demanding with myself has helped me a little bit be more demanding with my students. It can be good and bad, because sometimes I have this belief that, oh, they can do it, but maybe but in reality, they're not ready to do it. That's why this whole process that I told you earlier, understanding your students, is important. Because if you just go in like, oh, they can do it because yes, they can, it's not going to work, because not every student is like that. You have to see what their level is, see how good they work, what things they're better at, what things they're worse at, what things they need to work on at. So it's like, that belief has been a good thing and a bad thing for me. That value, I mean, of mine. Other than that, just being very honest and transparent with my students, I feel like has always been really good too. Like, telling them the reality of a situation whenever I can, giving some aspects of what life has been for me and why I explain certain things in a certain way. It can also, like, there's another contradicting part with that, where sometimes I also have this idea that students want more than what they actually want, when that's not actually the case. This idea that maybe a student is like, oh, the teacher isn't teaching me enough. And I'm like, oh, in my mind, like, it conflicts with me. And I feel like I have to do more than what I'm doing. So it is a negative aspect sometimes. But sometimes I also feel like that also pushes me to do more and to, like, give more value, which is always good for a student. Just some students won't always accept it that way. Like, if you think about your life as a student, you don't want to be studying 24 hours a day. And if you have a teacher who thinks that you want to be studying 24 hours a day, you're going to be very stressed out.
So, okay, let me ask you something. As you said, you have these sort of students that are like thirsty of knowledge, but there are also the case in the same classroom of these students that are also like getting behind, like being left behind. How do you manage that kind of situation?
That situation is always difficult to manage, especially when you don't know the students. It's really, that's why it's really, I find it really good to get to know who they are. Aside from student A, student B, student C, like who is John? Who is Juanito? Who is Stephanie? Like who are they as people and what do they like? Because once you know the things that they're interested in, you can kind of gear your class, like, you know, make your class a little bit more emphasized to something that interests that student. That's one way that you can reach them and make them participate a little bit more. Another way, of course, is to pair them with students who have a little bit more knowledge, because sometimes a student who is falling behind feels bad and doesn't want to try because they know they'll never catch up. But if they're getting the support and assistance of a student who is already ahead, then maybe they'll feel more motivated to try a little bit harder, you know, because they're like, oh, okay, I'm getting some help, so I'm not going to fall completely behind. Every strategy, and this is something that I'm not sure how many people are going to listen to this, and maybe hopefully future teachers listen to this, but there is no universally perfect strategy. And I've always tried to find that, like, what is the perfect strategy to reach everyone? But even when we as teachers learn how to be teachers, they tell you every student is a world. And they say it in Spanish, but you know, every student is a world. So you can't expect that a strategy that works for one world is going to work for every world. So all you can do is test different strategies. If one doesn't work today, try a different one tomorrow, maybe modify it a little bit so that way you can reach that other student. In some cases, with the students that I deem unreachable, you have to bring in the help of the parents because you just really don't understand what kind of situation they have at home. So you need to see what the parents have to like, what's happening in their life outside of school, so that way maybe they feel more motivated to try, like, you know, maybe by fixing some things in the background. It's really tough being a teacher because you have to understand things that sometimes you don't even understand about yourself, or you've never had to try to understand about yourself because you've never had that specific problem, you know.
Now that you're talking about the background of your students, how do you think that the socioeconomic background of them affects their learning process?
It depends on what kind of environment they find themselves in, because if, like, for example, I've seen a lot of students, and this is where there's a conflict, because there's a lot, you hear this a lot, that there are students who live in the countryside and they're amazing students, that they have no resources, but they are amazing students. But since they have no resources, they don't get ahead. And that's why, you know, the government helps them. And vice versa, you hear the case of students who have everything, like money, like power, but they're terrible because they have these things. So sometimes it really, what I think really influences the situation more than the money and more than the environment that they, well, I guess it is the environment. It's not the external environment, like when you go to the school, it's more the internal environment that you have at your house. If your parents teach you good values, if they tell you to study instead of spend 10 hours on a video game, they tell you no, spend 2 hours studying, then you can have like an hour to play. Like if there's control, if there's a certain level of I guess parental involvement, the student will do a lot better than if there is none. So it's more not the economic side, but more the social side, but the internal social side, because that'll make the student be better or sometimes worse when they leave their house. Because like I said, you can have really good students with no economic resources, and you can have really bad students who are students that have laptops, cell phones, They have the best teachers, the best school, quote unquote, the best school. So it really depends on what kind of person they're being raised to be in the household, and also how much attention they're getting after that. Because it's terrible for a student to leave the house and be terrible, but it's even worse if, as a teacher, you notice that the student is terrible and you don't do anything about it because you're just letting them be that. They're letting them be terrible.
Exactly. I totally agree for that. Let's go to the next question that says, okay, what was the impact on you and your students when you went from face-to-face classes to virtuality due to the pandemic? Did you meet your teaching goals with your students? Do you think your strategies in virtuality work for you?
Well, it's kind of funny, because this kind of is there's like a before and after kind of thing here. At first, I think everyone, or the majority of people, especially the less dedicated students, were very happy to have virtual classes. Like, it was like the ultimate happy party at the beginning, and I remember that because people were overjoyed they didn't have to go to school. So like there was this happy feeling. And as a teacher, honestly, it was something that impacted me a lot, in the sense that I had a strategy in person, but I didn't have a strategy online because I'd never given online classes. So I had to completely adapt to online classes. The good thing is that I think during the process of that year, when that happened, I had started working with certain online resources a little bit more. So I had something that I could do with my students online. And I made my classes very interactive, and the students really, really, really loved that because there was a lot of games, a lot of competitions. Again, what I told you earlier, the competitions that made students feel incentivized to be in the class, to do the activity. And that's why I mentioned earlier that, like, there's this whole situation that before the pandemic, I didn't have the possibility to do anything technological because students didn't have technology, and some of them probably didn't. But then during the pandemic, everyone had to have a phone, everyone had to have access to a computer, everyone had to find a way to make their situation work, and we did.
To get used to it.
And we had fun. It was a little bit of a learning experience, of course, because at first it was like, okay, how do I do this in a way that it's going to work, not only in the fact that, oh, we have fun with it, but that we also learn from it. So I had to find the correct resources, do the correct things in order for it to work. So it was tough, but it definitely worked in the end. And of course there were things that, like, weren't perfect. I think everyone had the problem with the one student or the two students who would have the camera off and they'd probably be sleeping, or they had the camera off and they weren't even there. But that's just something that really, once again, what I told you earlier, it doesn't depend on us. That's a family thing. That's a house thing. Like, if the student has the camera off and they aren't even there, the parents have to be there to make sure that they're in class, because we can't control that. I can't go into someone's house and tell them, hey, why isn't your student paying attention? Like, yeah, I mean, your child. So, there's that.
Okay. I think that was a good perspective. Now let's go to the next question that says, how did it it impact for you and your students coming back to face classes? Could you spot improvements on your students, or did you spot learning gaps?
This is kind of like where I think of the, like I told you earlier, like, it was a party when students went into virtual classes, but it was like a boomerang. Like, hey, whoo, happy. And then afterwards, when it reached all the way over there, they got really, really sad because they didn't like virtual classes, because it just wasn't the same and they weren't learning. And then when it came back, it was like, when they got back to classes, they were happy again. So it was like, at first it was obviously a very happy experience. Now there's still going to be students who who want to be at home, but they don't want to permanently be at home because they know what that feels like. But it definitely was another learning curve because, like I said, it took me some time to adapt to teaching online. But in that same way, it took me some time to adapt to teaching in person again. It's kind of weird how as a in the personal aspect, in my personal aspect, I lost a lot of confidence in my presence as a teacher. At first, when I got back into in-person classes, you know, face to face and everything, but then I started getting a little bit more confident and doing things like I used to do them. Not the same way because I adapted new strategies because a lot of the old strategies, believe it or not, I kind of forgot some of them. And I just because I hadn't used them anymore. So I just had to make new strategies, do new things, and yeah, just adapt. As for the students, they really did feel like at first they were happy. You couldn't see it on their faces because they were wearing masks, but they were they were happier to be there because they had so much time without being in person that it was like, okay, we're back now. It's we can actually learn. And at least in the academy, because in the high school, I at that point I kind of stopped working at high school, but in the academy, you have students who are very motivated to learn in comparison to a high school. So it was so there was the happiness of being back. There were of course a lot of situations with each one. Some of them, since they hadn't been in a classroom environment and since they had lost some of their abilities, I guess you could say, they were a little bit further behind than you would want them to be. You expected a little bit more, and they were a little bit further behind than that. So, but it's not everyone. And in the academy, as you already know, everyone's divided into groups. So if there's someone who's a little bit further behind in the group, it's not a substantial further behind. It's just they might have a little bit of gaps in vocabulary. Maybe their listening isn't as good, certain things like that.
Okay. Now, let's go to the next question that says, how is your classroom? What are your resources, the facility, the number of students, and how many hours do you teach in a week?
My classroom at the academy, what I like is that it has air, because I know that there are classrooms that are burning hot. And honestly, in life, if I had to choose over being super hot or super cold, I'd rather be super cold. It's just team cold kind of thing. But in terms of resources, we have the projector, the ability to use a laptop to project things and do activities. I'm able to, whenever I go to the academy, print out the sheets that I need so I can give my students so that they have something to work with and something that they can take home so that they can review if they're at home and they want to review it, of course. That's personal to each person. I never force it. I do send homework sometimes, of course, because I think that there should be at least, even if it's just 10 minutes, like you focus on a homework assignment for 10 minutes, which is really, really short amount of time. But it is a really short amount of time, but it's better than nothing. Like if I had to choose, I always tell everyone, and this in general, like exercise, if we talk about nutrition, if we talk about something that you like, something, even if it's one, is better than zero. Because zero is nothing. One is at least you did something. So, you know, even if it's 10 minutes, I feel like giving them that homework assignment will let them practice the English and improve in that a little bit more. The number of students, each classroom, there's generally maximum 10 students. Like if in an exaggerated case, like that we've had some years at the academy, we've had maybe like 12, 15. But the good thing is that even with big groups at the academy, you generally have more control because they're students that want to learn English, you know, 90, 80% in comparison to in a normal classroom. Like you go to a high school, and I always tell everyone this, you have to assume that out of 30 students, if you have 30, some people have 40, I've had 40 before, five of them are truly dedicated to the learning process. Like they want to learn. Those are good students. You might have another 5 or 10 that they're a little bit lazy, but they're willing to try. Everyone else is just does not want to do anything. So, you're dealing with almost half or more than half the class that is really there and doesn't want to try. So it's a difficult situation to manage. But when you have 10, 15 students, they're super easy to control, and even more when most of them want to learn. Because that's another problem in a high school setting. The majority wins, and the majority is always the ones who don't want to work. You could also say that the teacher has to know how to control it, but I feel like there shouldn't be a need for the teacher to have to put in like extreme effort, have to yell, have to be mean, have to be like almost a monster for the students to like pay attention to them. And that's what most teachers have to be. And I really feel for them because like I know teachers who have very complicated situations where they have to work, they don't have a choice, like in that kind of setting. But I feel like they could do something better if they had a different opportunity and a different situation in life. But that's entering more of a, you know, me understanding what life is like for people, and sometimes what things are like for you when you have to like do something versus what maybe you would want to do in a different situation. So that's the amount of students.
I'm really grateful for your help so